let's go right to it. And we'll open up the phones later in the program for your calls for Bob Chapman. But right now, good morning, Bob.
Well, good morning again. It's nice to be here. And you pretty well covered the background.
Good. Let's get into it. But before I get into Greece, I want to get into Greece. I want to get into the United States, of course. But one area that I want to touch on that we haven't been seeing much of in the mainstream media is what is happening over in Japan. In your most recent edition, you stated that Japan is being underreported and that the situation there is far worse than we are being led to believe. What can you give us as far as an update?
Well, generally speaking, that's true. We've had a couple of ministers in Japan come out and say this country may not be habitable in the future.
The entire island of Japan?
Right, the entire island. And, of course, these people work for the government or are in government, and how accurate they are remain to be seen. But in the absence of other information being released, I mean, they're just keeping it totally out of the news. And, you know, there's been dreadful things that have happened in conjunction with those nuclear reactors over the past couple of months that haven't been reported on. And they're trying to cover it up. I know that manufacturers are being forced to move some of their production facilities off the island, and how permanent that will be remains to be seen. It's just not very good.
When do you think we'll find out more about the situation in Japan? They can't hide something like that forever.
Well, I guess the answer to that really is they can't hide something like that forever, and we're going to find out what we're going to find out. But there are alternative reports coming through, and I'll probably have one in Wednesday's issue, and I try to keep up with it, but I don't do too much in that area because there's not a lot of information available. And I do know people there, but they don't live anywhere near there. And they're getting the same gobbledygook everybody else is. So, sort of a super secret.
Let's move then to an area that you do know quite a bit about, and that is what is happening over in Europe, and specifically starting with Greece, where the citizens have been rioting. And it looks as if we're getting closer and closer to default. Is that the situation?
Well, you hear that from two sides. Those with a political and financial interest are saying, oh, they'll make a deal. Those on the other side say no. Greece never should have been admitted in the first place, nor should Italy have. And I wrote at the time that that was not the right thing to do, and that they were Mickey Mouse in their books. That's the way I put it. And it all turns out that that, in fact, was the case. In both cases, it was J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, and Citigroup who were supplying them with credit default swaps, which were covering up the difficulties that they were having financially as countries.
I think that's an important point. We need to be aware that approximately 11 years ago, when we were looking at the formation of the Eurozone, the big banks were cooking the books to make this all possible. And they've been cooking the books ever since.
That's right. In fact, they cooked their own books. But that's another subject. But what has gone on, I've been on Greek television and radio a number of times and interviewed by the big newspaper there. And we have a lot of subscribers in Greece, and I get a lot of intel from Greece. And the stage that they're at right now is that the tables have really turned on the bankers. Bankers bought bonds from Greece. They are the experts. They should have never bought the bonds. Now they want Greece to guarantee the bonds on any new loans that they make or bonds that they buy. And the deal that they want Greece to abide by is outrageous. They want them to collateralize anything further that is loaned to them by all the seaports, all the airports, and there's 236 of those in the country, incidentally.
Okay.
The islands, all mineral rights, the airline, the water, telecommunications, transportation, electric. I mean, you name it, they want it. They just made a deal with Deutsche Telekom, who had owned part of the telecommunications system in Greece, and they wanted to buy the 10% ownership that Greece had in the company. And so they did. And they paid 30 cents on the dollar. This is called financial rape by financial terrorists. That's exactly what it is. They're
basically trying to strip out everything of value and then put a billboard up in the Parthenon.
That's correct. And, Mr. Samaras, who is the head of the opposite party, he says, well, that's all well and good. Why didn't you have those terms for Ireland and Portugal? Well, of course, he got no answer. From the very beginning, they wanted to steal the country. And effectively, that's what they want to do. Well, anyway, getting back to the table, so to speak, the Germans and the French were arguing over how to go about this, and the Germans wanted to make the bondholders as responsible as the countries were in participating in new loans. And the French have obviously convinced the Germans that they shouldn't do that. Why? Because it would injure the bankers. Pity them. But anyway, they want the New Deal that's being offered by the European nations and the IMF is we'll sell some of your stuff off so we can steal it, and we give you a new loan, and we'll extend it a bit, but the bankers won't get taken to the cleaners. And more important than anything else, the credit default swaps will not be called in. Now, those credit default swaps, most of them were written by U.S. banks. The same, rogues gallery that we talk about all the time.
Sure.
And it's $120 billion that they guaranteed. So they're on the hook for half of this. And so nobody wants a default. So again, the tables are turned. The Greeks are really in the pound seat, so to speak.
So let me see if I've got this right. You've got the ECB holding somewhere in the neighborhood of $270 billion in Greek bonds. You've got U.S. banks holding about $120 billion of credit default swaps on those European banks for that debt. So
That's correct. And, the question arises, why would U.S. banks do that? And this brings us to another question. When the 60% of the bonds that were sold by JPM, GS, HSBC, Deutsche Bank to the German banks, those bonds contained mortgages. Now they're called toxic waste. They were sold as AAA, they were triple B. That's the difference between a 10 and a 4.
Mm-hmm.
Why wasn't there ever any lawsuits? Why was there not any criminal charges? And the only reason I can figure out, and I used to do this kind of work, is that they made a deal. And the deal was, look, you take this garbage, we make our money, if anything happens, we'll take care of you. And that was borne out by the Federal Appeals Court lawsuit by Bloomberg versus the Fed, who wouldn't tell anybody who got the money that they were lending out. And finally, they were forced to tell who was getting the money, and 60% of it went to Europe, to these banks and others. And so this is another cover-up is what it is. That's why the American banks wrote the credit default swaps, which is insurance, on the loans or bonds that were being purchased by banks in Europe from Greece. And that's what it's all about. They're all interconnected. They're all in this together. It was just like laying off bets at Vegas or something like that. And that's exactly what they were doing, and they're not going to tell you that because they're criminals.
Now,
people have to understand that.
Believe me, some do. And the next question is, and we'll get to this after we take a break that is coming up, but the next question is, do the Greeks themselves understand that they are dealing with the criminal bankster element here? Or do they realize that they are seeing the assets of their country pillaged, sold off, stolen from them? And we've seen these pictures of the Greeks rioting in the streets, apparently fed up with the situation, although the description that we get of it is a little bit different on television reports that we have here. Will the Greeks accept this? Will they actually accept a bailout and a theft of the assets of their country, or will they push it to default? And if so, what does that default actually mean? That's the question as we return for more with Bob Chapman on Hard Money Watch.
This is Hard Money Watch with Pat Gorman on Money Radio 1510.